which is what most of our psychiatric medications are these days that are still prescribed and used. They interact with multiple receptor systems in our bodies to have their end result. And
Dirty.
that's
It's
really
like
what.
it's like the orgy of pharmacology, dirty pharmacology. Just
It's
multiple partners working on you at the same time. Something that struck me very interesting is you've said that kratom is a complex symphony orchestra of alkaloids, and I wanted to ask you, what do you mean by that on a deeper level with the alkaloid interactions? Could you describe that symphony orchestra and what's going on?
Yeah, so I came up with that analogy one day mainly because of my love of music, but um,
What
and
type
just
of music,
thinking of.
by the way?
Oh, I'm all over the place. So
Yeah.
there's if you look at my playlist, it goes everywhere from classical jazz to hip hop to heavy metal to country. So it's truly all
So
over the place.
so your individual music taste is a complex symphony orchestra of different
Exactly.
tastes.
Every genre, just about.
Yeah.
There's a few things that I can't stand, but we won't talk about that. So, uh, but yeah, that symphony orchestra seemed to be a perfect analogy because if you look at a symphony orchestra, you're looking at you know dozens of instruments playing together at the same time, and in the cannabis field, they refer to like an entourage effect or something like that. I do believe that with Kratom, the sum of the whole is greater than any of the individual parts um, in terms of the overall efficacy. Because what happens is that um, you have different levels of different alkaloids. Mitragyna being the major alkaloid in the majority of the products that are available in the United States, and that's from a historical perspective that the original studies that came out were actually a sampling of 3 trees,
Hmm.
and they made the generalized statements that from those 3 trees, you see mitragynine being the major alkaloid, painanthine and speciogynin being the next two. But we're talking 66% for mitragynine of the total alkaloid content, and then looking down at 14, 15%, and maybe 10% for the next two. So even with those three compounds make up the majority of what's happening. But what's fascinating is those 3 compounds have completely different pharmacologies. And so
Mm.
it's almost like having a brass instrument and then a couple of woodwinds on the side that can't
Yeah.
be as loud and can't be as aggressive, but they're still contributing something to the whole melody. And so as we've started to look at each of these individual alkaloids, it's I've equated it to pulling that out of that symphony orchestra, and then we're listening to it at full blast, right?
Mm.
And so we're seeing all the effects of this one piece, and it's almost analogous to cooking and coming up with a dish that has all these different spices and ingredients in it. And somebody may not like straight garlic on its own, but if you throw garlic in with your Italian pasta dish, comes in nicely and it just sits in there well. So I think it's looking at it from this perspective, and what we're learning from each of these different compounds is that they all have different pharmacological effects associated with them, some of which can also be pain killing properties, but through different systems than the opioid system. So we've demonstrated that there's activity in the adrenergic system, which is where our sort of fight or flight system,
Mm.
where adrenaline, noradrenaline, or epinephrine, norepinephrine bind to those types of targets. We've also seen activity through serotonin receptors, which we know are involved in mood elevation. But serotonin is also involved in pain and relieving pain, and so you get this complex soup of what we used to call dirty pharmacology,
Yeah.
which is what most of our psychiatric medications are these days that are still prescribed and used. They interact with multiple receptor systems in our bodies to have their end result. And
Dirty.
that's
It's
really
like
what
it's like the orgy of pharmacology, dirty pharmacology. Just
that's
multiple partners working on you at the same time.
That's right. And that's why
Yeah.
they've changed it to polypharmacology, which is no
Yeah.
different in your description. So